The second he came out, Trump is Hitler. I've heard that so many times now, that Trump is Hitler. I swear, if he's anything short of Hitler, I'm going to be like, he did a pretty good job. You know? That's what you guys have done. Congratulations.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie for Reason. Today we're talking with Dave Smith. He's a comedian who's got a great special out called Libertas on September 11th, and he's also the host of two podcasts, Legion of Skanks and Part of the Problem. A libertarian comedian. Dave Smith, thanks for talking.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here. I've made it. The Libertarian Super Bowl.
This is it. The Libertarian Buzz Bowl, which is a much maligned and ignored ReasonTV video starring Chuck Schumer and Four Loko versus Juice back when they were caffeinated. Never mind. So talk about Libertas.
It's my first comedy special. I've been doing stand-up for 11 years. I'm very proud of it. It was produced by Gas Digital Network, which is my podcast network. And Louis J. Gomez, who's a hilarious comedian, just a great entrepreneur. He's the guy who started Gas Digital, and he directed it. And it's out September 11th. He chose that date, not me. But I'm excited, and I appreciate the nice words.
This is going to do for libertarian comedy what September 11th did for
libertarian
Lower Manhattan.
comedy. Yes,
okay,
exactly.
Yeah. It was a redevelopment project, according to Paul Krugman, who literally, like less than a week after the 9/11 attacks, said, the silver lining in this is that there's going to be a lot of building down there now.
That's right. Why does Paul Krugman never give George W. Bush credit for being such a great president in his mind, right? I mean, the record high spending, the wars. I mean, what could you not love? How is it that we were left with such a wonderful economy?
It is strange. But we'll talk about Libertas. Why is it called that? And I've watched it. It's very funny. What I love about it is that it's a critique both of Trumpism and anti-Trumpism.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about how you came to say, okay, this is the set that I want to commemorate in a special.
Well, it's just, I think the special is, it's really, like the first half of it is kind of my take on the last year and the Trump moment in politics, and the second half is more my take on the big picture of the country. But yeah, I think we live in like the most profoundly hilarious times ever. I think the Trump side and the anti-Trump side are both cartoonish and ridiculous. And in this profound, hilarious moment that we live, it seems like everyone's like too angry and dug into their side to enjoy the humor of all of it.
Two questions. One, how much when you say the Trump versus the anti-Trump side, and like neither Trump nor Hillary could get a majority in the presidential election, people are leaving the identification with the Republican or Democratic Party for, obviously what's taking them so long. But like, how much of America do you think constitutes Trump and anti-Trump? Like, is it 40% total? Is it 80%? And then what was the funniest thing, or what is the most bizarre thing about Trump's totally unpredictable, who could have guessed that this fucking would happen?
Oh my God. So it's, if I had to guess, I'd go more like 10% and 10% most. I think there's a big chunk that's just living their life and not really consumed with this. The people who don't vote, who don't really care, who don't, and God bless those people, by the way. But I think, the Trump moment, of course, caught us all off guard. But I think what I really saw out of the left wing, which was interesting over the last year, is an inability to deal with the facts on the ground and an inability to deal with anything that doesn't fit their narrative perfectly. So while they're yelling like, Trump's a racist, he's this horrible racist, I'm looking at Trump rallies and he's going, the media says we're racist, but we're going to do tremendously well for the black people. And then you get like huge ovations. And you're like, well, maybe he's not literally Hitler. There's something cartoonish and ridiculous about. Trump is literally a cartoon. Yeah. Literally. From his hair to his skin color to it's like you watching the news and there's people and then a cartoon character.
Yeah, and the way he talks, like we had a very big job. It's a very tremendous. He talks like an eighth grader from like 1945.
It's amazing, and I remember that when after the James Comey thing came out, I forget exactly how he said it, but he was like, he's a hacker, he lied, no good. It was like bullet points for a first grader. But what's the amazing thing about Trump is he's like this buffoon, but he holds a mirror up to the entire system and reveals how buffoonish it all is. So he had this ability to almost like drag everyone down into the mud, and then when they're all down in the mud, you're like, well, it's kind of a wash, and Trump kind of belongs in the mud. So once they're swinging insults back and forth, he's winning.
Going into the debates, I was, out of the Republican candidates, I was most favorable towards Rand Paul.
Me too.
You know, for obvious reasons, he was the most libertarian by far, and the most interesting, I think, in terms of trying to shake up a traditional Republican thing. But like when he would turn to what's-his-face, Jeb Bush, and just be like, oh, you're low energy, you know? And it's like, you could see Jeb Bush almost crying. And Ted Cruz, you know, like, you know, his lower lip was trembling because it was like they couldn't come back.
I've never seen anything like that in politics.
Yeah,
Jeb versus Trump, he just alpha'd him. It was just alpha versus beta. There was no
how do you get to being? I mean, Jeb Bush was not a minor political player. He's a very successful two-term governor. Comes from an aristocratic family in terms of politics. And is it that he had never been confronted by a tough, not even a tough guy, a clown?
I think something was exposed that in him, like a weakness. This is not a guy who wants to fight, and Trump is a guy who's like a fighter. I agree with you. I was a Rand Paul
it was like
guy.
Mike Tyson after he got clipped by Buster Douglas, and then suddenly everybody could beat him.
Well,
you know.
Yeah, well, there was something that was exposed, and then once that was exposed, it was just like you couldn't go back from that. And but I remember the moment, and Rand Paul I thought was the best candidate by far, not even close, by far in the race. And there was this moment when Donald Trump, I must say, even I thought it was one of my favorite debate moments ever. But Donald Trump goes, he was talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and how he's against it, and he goes, the Trans-Pacific Partnership does not address China's currency manipulation, and that's the problem. And Rand Paul, no moderator, Rand Paul goes, should someone point out that China's not a part of the TPP?
Yeah.
So it's an agreement between us, Japan, and South Korea. We can't address China's currency in this. And
and he was pointing out that it was an attempt to hem in China in the Pacific region.
So we can't. But of course, we can't make a deal on their currency in agreement that they're not in. And then Donald Trump goes, Rand Paul is at less than 1% in the polls, and it was just like, oh, I guess Trump won that moment. That's where we're at. But that is hilarious.
Well, you know, in
tragic.
In the special, you talk about Trump's ability to kind of just wing it, and like you talk about the pussy grabbing comments and stuff, and it's like once he says that, and like the world doesn't end, the sky doesn't fall, and he isn't rushed off the stage. It's like anything goes. Talk a little bit about that, and about, you know, what is it that Trump clearly exposed the weakness of conventional politicians to, you know, kind of talk back to people who are kind of in their face. But what else is Trump bringing to political discourse?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Right, like so he's bringing this this unscripted, this idea that I'm not playing within what was the agreed upon parameters. Like, we're going to be out here. I can just, you know, say whatever I want to you. And politicians have a very tough time. They're all like scripted robots. So they have an amazing time struggling with that. The other thing that's like really, really interesting about all of it, and this is kind of my critique on the left, and I know you can really relate to this, because like as libertarians, right? So you're somebody who's been here writing about for years, like, you know, criticizing Obama for
Are you calling me old?
I'm just
This
saying,
is like elder abuse.
You've been, since the 30s, you were writing for
no,
Reason
that's
magazine.
right.
But so you're.
I thought that Wendell Willkie, not such a good guy.
So you were very critical of Obama's deportations, for him being at war every day of the administration. And then like Trump comes out and he's like, we're going to deport people. We're going to bomb the heck out of them. And the liberals are like freaking out. And you're like, but like your guy who you're celebrating as the greatest president ever is doing this. And one of the things Trump exposed is that, like, it's his words that they're so offended by. Meryl Streep, actually, how out of touch are you when you go, it was the moment that he made fun of a reporter with a weird arm? Like, okay, Trump shouldn't have done that, but like, was this the moment? Forget starting a war that was unnecessary. This is like the sin of all sins. Like,
well, that's
the guy's
like,
an adult. He can handle it, I'm sure.
It's like South Park when Mr. Garrison, you know, as a transgender Trump candidate, makes a sexist joke or something, and then people are like, oh, that's it, I'm out. What took you so long?
That was the most brilliant, I thought, political comment ever when he said the grab him by the pussy thing, and then people started storming out, and Mr. Garrison, who's Trump, the thing, he goes, oh, did that do it for you? Not the fuck the immigrants to death, right? But the grab, and that was, what an amazing comment though, on like our society. It's like, oh yeah, no, you can, I don't actually care about people being victimized and being oppressed, but I need to be the one who cares about that, so just don't talk about it. So do it quietly.
Two things, and first, does Trump's rhetoric though, where he makes explicit, in many ways, in terms of blowing up Middle Eastern or third world countries in terms of deporting illegal immigrants. He's only making explicit what Barack Obama did. But is he also playing to a kind of tribalist, nativist, racist sentiment in America? Or maybe not, maybe tribalist is better.
Yeah.
And then what is it about talk about that. Is that part of what he's motivating in America?
Yeah. Yes. I think yes. I mean, and obviously, yeah, to a large degree. But I don't racism is a very, very broad term. So you can have somebody who's, by today's microaggression standard. I mean, anything not politically correct is racist. But yeah, I mean, look, a preference for your own or wanting to live around your own is something that, a lot more of us have than we actually voice. If you just look at real estate and self-segregation and things like that, a lot of people now, I'm like a person who's from a city and always lived around a lot of different groups of people, but I think a lot of people in the middle of the country look at the demographic changes in America and don't like that.
Have you spent any time in the middle of the country?
I have. As a stand-up comedian, that's one of the things I've been able to do is I've traveled all over.
Do you only go to whites-only comedy clubs, or are they effectively whites-only comedy clubs?
No, let me tell you something. I've done quite a few black rooms, Spanish rooms in my life, and lots of mixed rooms.
You see, mixed rooms, speckled, they used to be called.
The only ones I'm
Salt
against.
And pepper rooms.
I'll play any of the rooms, but I like them to be completely segregated.
Yeah, no, that's Malcolm X meeting George Lincoln Rockwell. That's they both agreed on segregation, right? So what is the response from a libertarian perspective to that kind of dynamic in Trump?
Well, I thought, and I think this really says something, because I think Hillary Clinton is one of the worst candidates you could possibly just absolutely horrific. Would have been a nightmare, and Trump was disqualifying for me. I just couldn't get on board with that, and I would have loved to be able to get on board with any anti-Hillary. Anyone who had a real shot of beating Hillary was very tempting to me. But no, I mean, just as you said, I mean, once you start talking about mass deportations, targeting families, bringing torture back, I mean, these things to me were too profoundly unlibertarian for me to support.
But how do you convince? I guess what I'm asking, how do you convince Trump supporters that this guy is kind of fucked up? This is this isn't good, and it's not this doesn't have a good ending.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I guess at this point you can start looking at the facts on the ground, and I mean, look, he's done
some spectacular things. He's done more than any other president ever.
That's right. So much winning.
Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, I like to point out the obvious bullshit of Trump. So I really enjoyed making fun of some of my alt-right friends who you think I'm too sympathetic to. But when Trump made that trip and he went to Saudi Arabia and then to Israel, I was just laughing at all of them. I did a whole podcast on how do you guys feel? He just gave 100 billion in weapons to the most radical Islamists on the country, and then he went and kissed the ring of all your Jew friends over in Israel. So I think it's Trump had a brilliant insight. He saw an opening and played to it. Trump is not that guy. Yeah. Trump was a Hillary Clinton supporter. He's not. This is all just.
But he's not a cuck, right? Because what he's doing is he's turning the alt-right into cucks, because they'll follow him, to the gates of hell.
I believe there is a lot of cucketry on the alt-right.
Yeah, yes. Cucketry. That's even better than cuckoldry.
I think in a lot of ways, and I've said this very consistently, I think the alt-right mirror social justice warriors. They're equal opposite, but they're very similar in a weird way. It reminded me, I remember when the men's rights movement thing popped up, and it'd kind of be like the feminists would be out there we need these programs for women and government programs for women, and then the men's rights activists would be like, we need government programs for men, and you're like, you're just as bad now. Now you're the exact same thing.
Affirmative action for guys.
Yes, right. This is insane. So, but I see a lot, and they have.
Well, and there's the Trump the Trumpian version of political correctness, which I'm sure you get in anytime you write or commit to public speaking. People are like, shut up. You're a commie. You're this. You're that. If you're not balls deep with your nose up Trump's ass, and I realize that doesn't make any sense, but it's but
if you hadn't said that, I would have just gone with it.
But it's then that means you're a communist, and you were the one who transported Obama's birth certificate from Kenya to Hawaii or something like that, and it's kind of like,
which I still don't know who did that. But I agree with that. And they actually have the same way the left has this virtue signaling thing where everyone's got to change their profile picture to fight for 15 to let I'm on the right side. So the alt-right internet guys have anti-virtue signaling.
Right.
So it's like whoever can be the most hardcore, like I'd throw the Jews in the oven, and then you're like, yeah, you're the man. And it's really, you're doing the same thing they're doing. But I do think, like I've had this feeling for a long time, what really drives me crazy in America, and this is very true on the left, is like I was saying with Trump, like this thing where words are the worst thing in the world.
Right.
Like saying something offensive is horrific. Like if you were to go like, I just think Muslim culture is violent, you're like, you gotta go. But if you went, Islam is a religion of peace, and then you bomb the crap out of them, like you're okay. So I hate that. And what I don't like in like the libertarian world is this thing where it's like, oh, I have to come out and like repudiate, like I have to make it clear that I'm not a Nazi, which is like the most obvious thing ever. I'm a Jew preaching for individual rights who hates the state. What's less Nazi than that? But it's like I have to like condemn the alt-right because they've said mean words. Meanwhile, our party can run like a guy who supported the war in Iraq as their VP, who opened the campaign supporting Kasich, you know, who's like a war hawk, and then we can have a guy who's saying Jews have to bake Nazi cakes as our nominee, and these people who aren't outraged about that are like outraged that someone said no words. I don't have that same like. So
did you vote for Gary Johnson?
Nope.
Did you vote?
Did not. I made a whole video about how I don't think he should.
Ever?
No. That's
so
not
then
what I said.
why are we talking to you about voting? Why are you talking about voting? This is.
Well, because it's a pretty big
You might as well
thing.
be talking to me about having sex. I mean, it's like, you know, if we're just going to talk about stuff that's not happening.
Well, no, because no matter whether I vote or not, the winner of that election does rule over me. So it's relevant.
So you're happy then that at least 2 of 3 candidates that you disliked lost.
No.
Gary Johnson and Hillary.
Well, I guess in a sense, no, look, Gary Johnson certainly would have been preferable to these guys. I'm not denying that, but as a third-party candidate, you have to do a little bit more than be preferable. I'm not looking at you as the lesser of 2 evils. What I'm talking about is not democracy or who gets elected. I'm talking about libertarian principles and where your outrage should lie. Like if you're looking at all these sides. And yeah, if there's someone marching with a swastika.
Gary was pretty good on, you know, he clearly was not going to bomb a bunch of foreign countries, right?
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, look, if I thought there was a reasonable chance that Gary Johnson would have gotten in, I mean, look, I think you got to maybe know some foreign countries.
You would have woken up that day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe. You got to convince me. If you're going to be a third party, you got to convince me. And when you're sitting there and you're running away from your own philosophy constantly, and then apologizing for like how terrible it would be.
So was there a libertarian candidate early on that you would have voted for? And not as virtue signaling, because it's not, you know, I mean, I voted for Gary Johnson because he was the best candidate out of the ones who were there.
And I get that. I get that argument. You know, I'm not like.
And I don't think that my vote ever swings an election, but, you know, I like to express it, my preference. But.
I was open to voting for Rand Paul at the beginning of the. I mean, he didn't make it to the New York primary, but I was. I voted for Ron Paul, and I would vote again for him. He's a little old.
Tell me, well, you know, is he that much older than Trump in 4 years?
I think he's still working harder than he was in Congress. The guy puts out like 2 articles a week and 4 podcasts.
He's like always on TV.
He's a beast.
So talk about the left's inability to deal with, you've talked about this, and that what I love about the special, and it's not like a false equivalence or anything, but like, it's great to see somebody making fun of Trump and understanding Trump and also enjoying Trump on some level. But then the discombobulation on the left is amazing. And, you know, they used to, back in the day, they were, you know, fond of talking about being part of the reality-based community and all of this. And now you have, you know, people who just can't, it doesn't compute. Reality no longer computes for them.
I don't know what happened to the left over the last 10 years. Like, I don't know they went off the rails. And I thought, when I first came into libertarianism, I thought overall the left was a little bit better than the right. Like, I don't believe in this false equivalency thing. And I was like, well, you know, they're pretty passionately against war and mass incarceration. And like, those are kind of the most important issues to me. So, but I just look at the right over the last 10 years. And I think by and large, even if you want to focus on the 50 crazies in Charlottesville, by and large, I think the right wing has gotten a lot better from a libertarian perspective. They're much less hawkish. They're cooler about gay marriage. They're less pushing religion. Most of them have kind of retreated to libertarian positions. So like, instead of like, you really hearing people like, we have to overturn Roe v. Wade, they're like, I don't want my tax dollars going to Planned Parenthood. That's to a libertarian, I think that's a very reasonable compromise. Gay marriage can be the law of the land, but I don't want to have to bake you a cake if I don't want, like any libertarian, I feel like should look at that and go. I will eat the cake
if it's freely offered.
I'll eat a cake with a swastika on it. I like cake, okay? And Gary Johnson's good. I just don't want Gary Johnson to make me bake one if I don't want to. But anyway, but I'm just
You
saying.
might want to.
Now the left has gone.
Wait, you say you're baking a lot of swastika cakes?
I'm just saying.
But
I
you're
believe in
not at
market
all
demand,
pro-Nazi, right? Okay.
Look, I'm probably the best. There's a lot of Nazis. They're paying for these cakes. I mean, But no, I'm just saying. So, and then in the meantime,
They
in the
all
10
pay
years,
in gold too, right? Swiss gold.
I take Bitcoin. But so the left then has gone from being anti-war to like, okay, that kind of went away, and now it's like Trump could bomb the third world tomorrow and then make remarks that are offensive to transgender people, and like they wouldn't even care about the first.
Well, or they would say, and this happened after Syria, that Trump became presidential today.
Oh my God!
Because he bombed a couple of airstrips and like a Dunkin' Donuts somewhere in Syria.
As much as the media's been convincing me, and you could watch CNN all day or something like that, and they're convincing you how outraged you should be about Trump, nothing has outraged me more than the media coverage of his bombing of Syria. It was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my life. And I've just been more, to me, Trump has, and I didn't think anyone could, but he's exposed the media even more than I thought they were exposed. Like, I've never been so disgusted. CNN's gonna sit here every day and talk about how like, we're so concerned that somebody would like undermine democracy. You leaked debate questions to Hillary Clinton. You undermine democracy in the most profound way, and you haven't even apologized. They just move on. Like, that's no big deal. It's like, man, Trump, it is terrifying that this guy's in control of the military, but like what's even more or equally terrifying is that you guys are covering it.
So how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
34.
Are you, and you're allowed to say that as a comedian. So do we add 7 years? What's the typical comedian?
No,
I know actors it's
like,
10 years, comedians.
No, we don't care.
Okay, so you're a solid millennial, right?
I guess, yes.
Yeah, and that means that you, in a way, it kind of sucks to be you because you've grown up in a world that has only known like nonstop conflict. And it's not even good conflicts. Like nobody's pretending that the world is really held in balance between Iraq or Afghanistan. I mean, it's not like, it's not the Cold War, it's not even the fucking Olympics or Boris Spassky playing Bobby Fischer in chess, or like nothing really matters, but it's always on in the background, shitty economic growth. The one thing that's really clarifying for millennials is that I assume then you got to see Bush in action, and he's conservative, and then we elect Obama, and he's everything that Bush isn't, but does exactly the same stuff.
The biggest story that nobody's talking about right now with Trump is like just what you were saying, like how much is the same? Yeah. I mean, so much is the same. Like, yes, it's a little bit different what you see on TV. He's using Twitter, he's doing this, but like all the things we care about, like foreign policy, monetary policy, fiscal policy, like all of these things are exactly the same from Bush to Obama to Trump, like as different as you could be, and it's like, oh, Bush broke the records in terms of spending, and then Obama broke his records, and guess what Trump's gonna do? He's gonna break Obama's records.
So then why are millennials so totally in the tank for Democratic presidential candidates? And granted, there's only 3 of them basically, and it's fascinating. Bush versus Gore in 2000, they basically split the male-female vote, they split the youth vote. I mean, it was, kind of even Steven. But now it's like are any millennials, if they vote for a major party, will they ever vote Republican again?
I don't think so. I mean, not any, but yeah, in terms of like major, demographic trends, yeah.
I mean, we're talking like 2/3, or more.
I mean, I think like if you kind of look at what was going on in college campuses in the 60s, and then kind of the generation that came after that. I mean, you look at what's going on in college campuses right now. I don't see there being like a conservative trajectory for young people. No, I think, I don't know what it is, but socialism, leftism, all of that, it's really great propaganda, and it spreads like wildfire, and it's very popular with young people, and like, I don't know, I don't see anything, I see that going more, Bernie Sanders' wing has all the energy.
So how does Bernie Sanders, and I always thought of Bernie Sanders and Ron Paul as kind of interesting, because they're old, kind of nice guys, or not nice guy. I mean, Bernie is always huffing and puffing. He's like pure Brooklyn, bathed in a Ben and Jerry's like cream bath or something in Vermont. But he and Ron Paul are interesting because they're not charismatic speakers, but they're also very idealistic.
That's right.
And they both like latch into kids. Like what is going on there?
I hated that about Bernie Sanders because I thought so much of it almost like erased the Ron Paul memory, because it was aesthetically almost like, from a conspiratorial sense, you're like, did they just try to copy this but make a lefty version of it? Because it was like a kind of disheveled older guy who's just a truth teller. Like, I'm not really up here concerned with like making the perfect speech. It's like, let me tell you what's going on. But then you look at the major differences, and not just that, like the difference between me and the two of them is that, so Ron Paul was going around, like, so someone like me who came into the Ron Paul, this is how I became a libertarian, through the Ron Paul movement. he challenged all of my preconceived notions about what government was. He inspired me to like read all of these people, you know, like read Rothbard and Mises and Friedman and all of these great thinkers and think about all of these things. And he has kids chanting "End the Fed." Like you've read a few books if you're chanting "End the Fed" with Patch. Bernie would go around to these kids and be like, "Hey, so you're a college kid in 2017. You're amongst the richest, freest, most privileged people who have ever existed. Billionaires should be paying your bills for you." I mean, it's like he just played into everything they like. So it was the difference between a propagandist and like a truth teller.
It was also kind of interesting too. You know, thinking back to some earlier comments we had, Sanders also talked about the economy more. Like he is not a hardcore identitarian. Like he's not a social justice warrior. He is in terms of the minimum wage and unions, and you know he's always afraid of Pinkertons coming in and busting up a union meeting or something. But he's not talking about transgender rights and stuff like that.
So
if anything. He was attacked by Black Lives. Yeah, I mean, he got pushed off the stage literally in Seattle.
Oh, that's right.
By them early on because he wasn't sensitive enough.
Well, that's right. And also he did very poorly with the minority vote. Hillary killed him. I think Bernie Sanders is more attracted to this kind of old school economic socialist argument, and he's not so into the cultural Marxist argument where we've changed the oppressor and oppressed to race, LGBT,
gender. Et cetera,
So he still sees it through this like, no, it's the billionaire class and the economic. I mean, it's really,
it's
to me,
that
it's
Uncle
all the same
Moneybags.
thing.
Yeah.
It's all the same thing because it's this forced Marxist way of looking at the world as everything is oppressor versus oppressed, and it's like, it's utterly ignorant.
How do you reach millennials? And I'm assuming, as a comedian and through your podcasts and whatnot, and we'll talk about those in some detail. How do you reverse this? Or are you just kind of like, you know what, it's over and I'm just going to enjoy myself while it lasts? But I mean, like how, is the question that, your cohort, your generation doesn't remember history, or they have forgotten it, or are they like actually, they're knowledgeable and they've embraced something that has been proven wrong? I mean, how do you engage people? Like you say, Ron Paul, if it took an 800-year-old obstetrician to get you to rethink your premises, what are you going to do to make people your same age think different?
Well, that's a really great question. And I think you always, I love doing the podcast and talk. I'm a New Yorker and I was raised by a single mother, and so I kind of speak their language inherently. So I feel like I can talk to millennials in that sense. Mm-hmm. And to me, I make the argument that I find compelling. But I look at for libertarianism in terms of spreading the ideas, I mean, the people who did the most ever, like just undoubtedly, are like Ayn Rand, and she did it through novels. I don't think that's today's America. I don't think that's how you're going to reach but that was, in that time, that was how you could reach a lot of people. Yeah. Like Milton Friedman had that TV series, Free to Choose, and a book to match. But I think the TV series probably converted more people than the book at that point.
The book was a big deal. I mean,
the book was big too. Yeah. But it's like things like that.
It was a companion to the TV show.
To me, I think I do kind of look at podcasting today as being like, to some degree, like the medium of the time.
Can you become the Ayn Rand of Snapchat? Instagram?
Oh my God, I
Peach,
really love that.
Is Peach still a social media platform?
The Ayn Rand of Snapchat might be one of my new nicknames. I'm going to start branding myself that way.
Well, you just need a Snapchat account now and then somebody to tell you how to work it.
That's right. You just got to figure out Snapchat. I've already read some
Ayn Rand. Think of it, you're already there because like your messages disappear immediately or in time, and you're already, are you leaving a ripple behind?
I can't complain about. I guess there is a case, I actually talked to two people made comments, two libertarians made comments that really stuck with me. One was at a Reason event where Catherine was speaking.
Catherine Mangu Ward, the editor of the print edition.
That's correct.
Of Reason.
And she said, no matter how frustrated we get with the growth of the state, you always have to remember that the market is growing as well, and that we're living at like a better time than anyone's ever lived, and we have more wealth. So I think it's very important for libertarians to always remember that too. Like there's the state, but there's also all this great stuff that's going on here that we live through. And the other thing was what Ron Paul just convinced me that he said that libertarians absolutely should be optimistic. Mm-hmm. And he said that we should have the case for optimism is stronger than the case for pessimism. And I just took it as a guy like him who's been around this game for a long time, has kind of seen it all. And I think America might be on the way to a crack up, but like when the USSR cracked up, that was probably the best thing that ever happened to the Russian people and the Ukrainian people. And so maybe the fact that maybe this whole thing can kind of come unglued in a positive way. And we're not gonna just not have the technology anymore. Like that's gonna be there, so maybe we can figure it out.
Well, this is like the idea that, the Roman Empire fell and that was bad for the Romans, but it wasn't so bad for other people.
Right. And you could see very clearly.
That certainly was good for the Huns. right?
Yeah. But now it's not so great for people maybe who are invested in government bonds or something like that. Like there's going to be a lot of damage probably.
Yeah.
But I think even like you see like just having interest rates as low as we have for all these years, you're like, oh, okay, so we don't have to feel the crash. But you're punishing all the savers, everybody on a fixed income, and rewarding all the speculators. So like there is still pain going on, and it's not the people who deserve to be feeling the pain.
Your podcast, you do a podcast called Part of the Problem, which is a political one, and then you also do the Legion of Skanks.
That's right, which is like a filthy comedy
Okay,
podcast.
so let's talk about the filthy comedy first, and then if we have time, we'll get to the libertarian politics. But and these are on the Gas Digital Network.
Yes.
What is the best place for people to find the Gas Digital Network?
It's gasdigitalnetwork.com.
All right.
So right there.
There you go. 2 G's, 2 S's?
gasdigitalnetwork.com.
What do you talk about on Legion of Skanks?
Legion of Skanks will just be whatever. It's me, Louis J. Gomez, and Jay Okerson, two of the just funniest comedians out there, and we're just over the top. We try to find comedy in the most tragic, fucked up things. But it'll just be,
name one.
One time we did this, what's called the Gauntlet. We have to just sit there and watch the most horrific videos that are on the internet and just our reactions to like who could break down first and look away and stuff like that. So we go over the top, but it's just comics kind of talking shit, having fun. That's the vibe. Nothing too serious. And then Part of the Problem is my outlet where I rant and rave about what's wrong in the world.
And this is where recently, or within recent memory, you had Christopher Cantwell, the former member of the Free State Project, who got kicked out of that years ago for basically saying, hey, it's not just you're not just justified in shooting tax collectors, you're kind of required to.
Right.
And they're like, oh, okay, let's take this. And then he was the kind of star, he was the Jimmy J.J. Walker of the Charlottesville March, Unite the Right rally.
And he made quite a crazy transition. I mean, I remember seeing Christopher Cantwell videos from like 3-4 years ago where he was, railing against police brutality and how they oppressed the black community. He was a huge fan of Patrice O'Neill, a famous black comedian, and he was racially radicalized over the last few years.
So having talked to him, and I know, and you have a great. Well, you have the interview with Cantwell, and then you have a podcast after that talking about where people were like, you were too chummy with Christopher Cantwell, which both of these are pretty interesting. But do you have a strong sense of like, how does somebody, and Cantwell's like a New York guy, right, originally, and he's in his mid to late 30s, obviously, like he's weepy, he's lachrymose in a way that bespeaks not toxic masculinity, but some kind of personality problem, I suspect, or disorder. But how does somebody become racially, kind of operationalized or actualized, especially now? I mean, like, and if you're like, if you're from New York and stuff, like, who the fuck has time to be racist?
I mean, look, I certainly don't exactly understand that. And it's one of the things that I actually found really fascinating about Christopher Cantwell is like, how could anybody who's accepted like the non-aggression principle in libertarianism take this turn?
And he's super anti-Semitic too, which is a classic.
But he's got like Christopher Cantwell has this thing where he's first of all, he is a very talented writer and he's a very funny guy. And you almost sometimes can't tell. You can't separate what the joke is and what the reality is. And I tried to ask him this a couple times. I mean, Christopher Cantwell, and this is stuff as a comedian first, because that's what I am, really, a comedian first. I emailed him after he had sent me something, and then I emailed him. It was the day after the Charlottesville thing, and I said, hey, you want to come on my podcast, give your side of the story? And he said, I wouldn't miss it for an autographed copy of Mein Kampf.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that just makes me laugh, man. Like, even though it's kind of fucked up. But so he's got that.
So he's like Alex Jones, like, is he a performance artist or something? Or Michael Savage.
He even refers to himself as like a racist shock jock.
Yeah.
So like he's kind of doing a thing. And I had Richard Spencer on my show, I had him on my show, and I find it kind of interesting. And I find their take interesting, and I don't know.
You're just asking questions. It's also, you find it interesting that World Trade Center 7, obviously a controlled demolition.
Well, I'll say this. I make it pretty clear where I stand. Yeah. People who listen to my podcast have no doubt about where I stand on all of these issues. And the same thing I say when I go on a Fox News panel with some guy who's a CIA killer or somebody who's, advocating for the next war. I go in there. I mean, I don't know. I never get accused of being chummy with them. So while all of a sudden I have to play this left-wing game where like I go in and I talk to John Bolton and I go, no, that's a completely legitimate point. We should fight 5 more wars. That would be a disaster. Christopher Cantwell, you said a no word, just so everyone knows I'm not with him.
Do you think, though, that Cantwell was part of a broadly defined libertarian movement? Richard Spencer talked about how Ron Paul was the guy who actualized him into politics. Do libertarians have a special responsibility in the same way that the left does to the Antifa?
I'm sorry. Okay, this is what pisses me off. Okay, Richard Spencer and Christopher Cantwell are persona non grata. They can't go anywhere.
Wait, is that Mexican? I didn't understand that.
Well, that's,
I only speak English here.
Can someone translate
speak
that?
white?
No, I'm saying like these guys can't even speak at their own rallies. Okay, they literally can't even get up. They can't. There's not one conservative institution that would have them. They don't go to any of these television shows unless they're just slamming them. On the other hand, the left, you have full-fledged Marxist tenured professors. So I'm sorry if they're lecturing us about like what we need to get rid of our radicals. But you have like 3 people who came in from libertarianism.
Don't you get tired though of when people say things, and this was, I find, anybody who's carrying a Nazi flag, unless they're in a road touring company of the Sound of Music, it's like, that's sad and it's pathetic.
Absolutely,
right? But people were like, oh, they're doing, as long as they're doing it at a private function, like we should have no opinion.
No, that's of course not.
And don't you run into that with a lot of libertarians where it's like,
sure,
as long as it's a private business, who gives a shit?
Libertarians make the mistake that the only opinion that makes you a libertarian is like you shouldn't be thrown in a cage for it.
Right.
Doesn't mean I can't sit here and tell you it's not repugnant. And if anyone who would march with a swastika or a hammer and sickle, I just find it all like...
What about the stars and bars? The Confederate battle flag.
You
can live with
not
that?
as bad.
In
Not as
Brooklyn,
bad as... No, look,
I
I don't love it, but it's not the same thing. I wouldn't equate that to the same thing as that. I mean, that represents other things to people. But these are like not American
What about
movements.
the rainbow flag?
The rainbow flag, I'm okay with that. As a New Yorker, you got to be okay with that.
Yeah, can we get rid of flags? Aren't flags are like, I don't know, like a 20th century invention.
But so like for you and I thought you, I read your article about this on the gateway, the libertarianism being the gateway, and I think you quoted somebody in the article, but making the point that the guy who organized this came in through Occupy.
Right.
Yeah. So why don't we, well, how about we talk about, is our college campuses a gateway to Antifa?
Yeah.
How about that? Yeah. I mean, how many of these Antifa kids were studying from some left-wing professor? Yeah. So why do they never have to have any of this pressure? But then we got to sit here and be like... Well,
they should, though, shouldn't they?
Yes, they should. And we shouldn't, because this is nonsense. We're preaching something that is, as you point out in your article, the antithesis of National Socialism. I don't need to sit here and talk about it. You guys are preaching Marxism.
Yeah, actually, when you put it that way, we're not nationalists and we're not socialists. So
it's the opposite. Yeah. As I said, people have natural rights. The state is an immoral institution. I mean, how is any of this compatible with Nazism?
Do you worry about, well, when you go to comedy clubs, is there a sense, and you've been doing it now for over a decade, is there a rising sense for you that certain things are just not tolerated anymore? Certain types of speech, certain types of thoughts, and does this go like you get a lot of people who say like, oh, you know what, it's like, now because of political correctness, I can't use my, racial epithet of choice and like, oh, my freedom is being, irreparably damaged. That's one thing. But I mean, on college campuses, and you see it something like Evergreen State College within recent memory where people, were patrolling the campus with baseball bats, scaring people. There's a thugs veto all over the place. Antifa does this. They did it in Berkeley, recently. But is there, when it comes to comedy and when it comes to more substantive thought processes, do you think something is changing where people are, and it's not just different, it's new, that we're shutting down discourse?
I've noticed it in the 10 years I've been doing comedy, and I think anybody who's been doing stand-up for those 10 years would agree with me. It was like, when I first started, there was not this thing of like, there are no words and no topics that if you approach, the audience is gonna get tight on. And just like you said before, just because something's a cultural issue, and doesn't mean we can't have an opinion on it as libertarians. And I gotta say, and I don't really love this narrative because I always want the state to be the enemy. But in 2017, the threat to free speech is like this left-wing culture where like Condoleezza Rice, who me and you probably consider like a leftist, can't even speak on a college campus because she's like one step to the right of Hillary Clinton or something like that. Like that to me is a very scary trend. But with the stuff with the culture and comedy, I've noticed it. But what sucks about it is like, it's not like oh, we've grown and now we're a little bit more evolved, so we realize that minorities are hurt by these insensitive remarks. Look, I've gone all around to like black shows in poor areas. Minorities' feelings they don't care. They like a good joke. It's like college white kids who are going, so I can feel better as a human being. I'm gonna be offended by no words. And it's not what your intent or what you're saying. It's just if you say the wrong words, they get offended by you. I mean, it's like, it's utterly ridiculous.
Well, to kind of bring this lively conversation to a close, do you hope that your special airing on September 11th, and it's available on basically every digital platform you can, but go to the Gas Digital Network to rent it and check it out. It's very good. I highly recommend it. Do you hope it'll like kind of open things up a little bit? That'll kind of hit people in the head with a cartoon mallet and boing, and people will understand we need to be a little bit looser, just as we need to be looser in the economy. We need to be looser at the borders. We need to be looser about drugs. Can we be looser about thought?
I'd love to to have that effect on people, and I hope so. I do agree with you. I think we need to be looser on all these things. I want to just my goal is always just to put out a hilarious comedy special. That's just what I want to do. I want to make great comedy specials, and I want this to be great, and the next one to be great, and the next one to be great. And I'm obsessed with this, so that comes out in what I'm talking about. But yeah, I think I kind of feel like we need a cultural move. We want a culture that supports liberty. You know what I mean? That's kind of what we want. And I think it's not a bit, I love the idea of libertarian musicians. I know that there's this guy, Eric July, this band Backwards, that are phenomenal.
With a Z.
That's right,
hip.
Backwards with a Z.
Yeah.
And he's
That's crazy.
But
I've never seen anything like that.
His story is phenomenal. He was this kid who was a gangbanger who then found Thomas Sowell and then found libertarian writing and that. And then it's amazing. But I think people
By the
that
way, I want to say, as somebody who roomed in college with a guy who was really into Christian rock, just be careful what you wish for. Okay, if you want libertarian music.
Well, I'll tell you, but he's one of the guys, and I think I try to do this with my special too. It's not like something where I'm forcing libertarianism at you, and then there'll be a little joke here or there. It's this is comedy. I'm doing comedy, and it happens to be a libertarian doing it. So I don't know if it, what it's going to have, but I think we all have our little impact. What you guys do with the podcast, what you do with the magazine, what everyone does. We all have a little impact on our audience. So, and hopefully I get this to as big an audience as possible.
All right. Well, we will be doing our best to see that happens.
Thank you, sir.
We've been talking with Dave Smith. He's a comedian. He's got a great special out, Libertas, and on the Gas Digital Network. Look for it on all of your favorite digital platforms. He's also the proprietor, the host of 2 podcasts, Legion of Skanks, and Part of the Problem. Dave Smith, thanks so much for talking.
Thank you, Nick.
For Reason, I'm Nick Gillespie.